Hi, welcome on Glitters of Life podcast. I am your host Rohit, and we are back with another exciting episode. And today I have with me Andrea Olson, who is life and business coach, entrepreneur, and podcast host. And today we are going to talk about like how to curate ourselves, our life, how we can get creative, what's the inspiration behind having to do all of it, and like how we can evolve ourselves. So that is a very broad topic, and we are going to have fun conversation along with Andrea. Andrea, welcome on the show. It is such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Rohit. I'm really excited to be here.
Definitely. And as we see, like you are into a lot of things. So the world is always filled with the options plus opinions. So to start with, like I would love to know which side you love to be on and why.
Thank you for that question. So, what's interesting about all of those roles that you mentioned to start is that those roles didn't all start at the same time. And I think that's important to note because, especially if someone is venturing into entrepreneurship or has considered it, you aren't going to be able to do all things well simultaneously. So, number one, that's important. Like, options are fantastic. But if you keep every option tab open at all times, you will not get very good or expert level at any one thing. And I've seen it because I think it's actually the one of the greatest temptations for entrepreneurs is managing all of the options, all of the ways they could be spending their time with what actually is going to move their goals forward in a meaningful way for or whatever the reason is that they are pursuing it. So for me, options have been always a very positive thing, but I've also had to practice discipline to know when is it
Hmm.
the time to take that one of those options. And then where opinions come in, as you mentioned, is that everyone has them, right? Everybody's going to have an opinion, including yourself, right? And including people that you really love and care about. And so it's important that you ground first in knowing what is your own opinion. I think with the world of social media, we consume so many other people's opinions on a daily
Right.
basis, far more than I think we realize, that most of us don't spend enough time, even any time, reflecting on our own opinion first. And then you are really susceptible to being influenced by whatever way the wind blows or whoever you're listening to that day, including this podcast, right? So, even my opinion of this stuff, I really challenge people to consider what's your opinion of it because that's part of the engagement of knowing what really matters to you. So I think it's a blend of the two. Options are great, opinions are great. Know yours first would be where I start.
Absolutely. And it's all about making the right choice. It could be the option might be numerous one, but how many, what kind of options you are choosing. And we don't have to look at all the options is what I feel, because you will be able to manage better with the limited options, and the opinions, they do matter if it is coming in a constructive way. I feel that it will shape the decision making as well. So you just have to find the balance and see where you can cling on to and on which side you can be at that given moment. So it's a great practice to follow, Andrea. And you have been like the family first entrepreneur. So how does it feel to be, and what was the journey bit like till you became the one? Because uh, people want to get into entrepreneurship. They are doing a number of things to venture into it, but they don't really know what it takes and what the journey feels like. So would love to know from your experience how tough it was, how exciting it was, and what made you to take a plunge into it.
Yeah. So when you mentioned family first entrepreneur, which is what I identify myself as in entrepreneurship, the reason I say that is because I grew up in a time within entrepreneurship. I grew up in a time of hustle culture. I grew up at a time where everyone was obsessed with performing at the highest level possible, peak performance at all times. And I actually started my journey of entrepreneurship very much in that place. I was very influenced by that. I also didn't have a family yet. I was uh, getting married, I was starting that process, but I didn't have children, I didn't have other competing priorities. So I could be very obsessed with the road of peak performance. And that was a time that I learned a lot and it has been really beneficial. I don't look back on that with any sort of negative lens. But what has grown and evolved for me is realizing that when I blend two of my loves, which is family and faith, which that's a component woven together for me, and entrepreneurship and pursuit of goals and achievement and accomplishment for the purpose of the greater good of my family, when I blend the two, I actually perform at a peak level. And so realizing that was actually getting the best of me instead of just having to parse off and give the rest of the, whatever was left to my family. And that aha happened as I had children, as I started to see mentors that I could really look to that were doing that well. And so if you don't have that, I really recommend finding it because there are people that do it well. Maybe they're harder to find because that might not be the loudest voice that you see on social
Yeah.
media, but they exist. And it's really actually very freeing when you realize there is a better way. There is another way.
Right. And it's always exciting because you never know what kind of journey you'll be having ahead. You just have to see, you just have to test the depth of the water. That is how the entrepreneurship feels like once you're starting out. So before venturing into that, could we just go back into the times where you were working into the corporate? What kind of thoughts you were having before getting into this? Because many of the people are thinking that 9 to 5 is something that can't have. Like they can't perform at their productive best. It is something that gets monotonous. So what would be your thing towards that?
Yeah. So I started my journey as an entrepreneur while also continuing to work as a 9 to 5. What I would joke is that it was never 9 to 5, right? It was like 7:30 to six
Even in
fifteen.
business it's the same.
Yeah, and I know it is. So I know people can relate to that. And I was pouring a lot of energy towards that job. And it actually was a career for me. It was something I really enjoyed for many years. It was something I was good at. I was growing, I was getting promoted. But this nudge to kind of pursue entrepreneurship came at a time where I was just starting to look ahead at maybe what the next 10 years of life would look like. And what I noticed was I didn't want my boss's job. I didn't want what she had to do. And it wasn't because she wasn't good at it, it was because the nature of the job really changed. I was in human resources, and the role that I got into human resources for was for the people, the engagement, the cultivating culture, and helping the company thrive with its employees. What my boss was having to do was do all of the not so fun legal employment stuff and having the conversations of letting people go at a high level and just honestly the stuff that sucks your energy. And so as an entrepreneur, I started this journey and I started noticing that this was giving me creative energy. It was actually filling my tank. And yes, I was working super long hours and then I would come home and work on my business until really late and get up really early, but it was fueling me. And so I always tell people who are working full time and considering something on the side, start with something you're going to be passionate enough with that you will want to wake up early to do and stay up late to finish, because otherwise you aren't going to just find the extra time. There's never just extra time. You have to have something that actually fuels you enough to want to pursue it. And so when I did, and when I continued to, and it was for 3 years before I was in a place where I could shift away from corporate, but those 3 years were very defining in my life, and they were moments that I look back on and go, if I didn't have that experience, I don't think I would
Yeah.
be the type of entrepreneur I am today. So I would tell somebody who's considering all of that is don't make a rash decision. Like lean into it where you are and find something that energetically you are going to be lit up about so that you can pour into it whatever you have during that season. Likely you can't just up and leave your job, right? So I think that's super important. I didn't hear that advice enough, and so now I'm giving it because I feel like it's important for people to hear.
Loved it because for me podcasting is the same way. Like I love to do it. I can get wake up early in the morning, I can stay at night as well. So that is something, the kind of energy that you need. And did you ever had this fear of failing while doing so?
Oh, yeah, I still do. I mean, the thing is, if you care about something, you are going to care if it fails. I mean, if I didn't care if it failed, then I probably wouldn't be putting much of myself in it, right? I think that's a good gauge on like how much energetically and
Right.
with purpose are you giving something. So, yeah, but do I stay in a place of fear? No. And I think that's the difference is when you are in a place of fear, the best thing you can do is to take action. If you are staying stuck, that's on purpose. It's actually very purposeful to just repeat over and over again, I feel stuck. Because the antidote to that is to take some meaningful action. Your brain can't focus on fear and action simultaneously. It has to override it to take the action. Now, it doesn't mean you won't come back and forth and there won't be moments where you still have to push through it, but it is the way to train yourself to not stay there longer than you have to.
That's a fantastic perspective, I would say, because we all need that realignment, how we are looking at it, what kind of decisions that we can take by being into that particular situation, because you never know what would be the times, like the kind of advancement that we are seeing into the business or like the AI and all thing. People just have got the fear. People know that will they be able to perform to their peak. So that is something that they have to consider. And Andrea, being a wife, mom, business owner, podcaster, how do you make sure to offer best in all of it? And how do you simplify all of it? And you did talk about the family and faith. So I would love from you to share about that as well.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, you don't do it all at the same moment. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I really want to call out because everyone listening is wearing multiple hats in their life. There's no question. There's every one of us has multiple roles. You can't effectively do them all simultaneously. So who you are, first and foremost, is a person. You are an individual. The only way you can perform those other roles best is to first know yourself. And I think that's one thing that we quickly forget is that if we're just running around trying to make everyone else happy, you aren't going to be able to sustain that for very long because you're not actually tapping into maybe what is your own uniqueness. Like what I'm best at is to inspire other people to lean into their greatness, to figure
Yeah.
out what they do best. And if I wasn't doing that in my own life, I know there'd be a part of me that would be feeling void of that purpose because it exists. It's a real thing for me. So, taking the time to first assess what is that uniqueness for you that really lights you up, that's going to have a ripple effect on the other roles that you play. My kids know how important my business is because it plays a big part in our family dynamic. And then my business partners know how important my family is because
Yeah.
they know the boundaries I set around my time and certain days of the week and certain hours of the day that are completely reserved for family. So I think you have to be able to speak to both equally and in a way that connects dots for people. They're not going to connect them on their own. They're not going to know what's a priority for you right now if you're not telling them and living it. So you do have to be doing both. You mentioned the family and faith component.
Yeah.
For us, the way we choose to raise our family and be in relationships with others comes from a place of truly loving that faith is a component. It's where we send our kids to school. It's the types of friends that we surround ourselves with, where we go every Sunday. But more than that, I always like the first thought I have is would someone be able to recognize that in us without knowing that other dynamic? Would people be able to see that love from a distance who don't know all the intricacies of where we spend our time? If they can't see it, then it's not real. So the lens I'm looking through is always how is it evident in the way I live? And then that becomes kind of like the jumping off point of how our family, makes priorities and sets priorities.
Andrea, you have been speaking through your experience. You have been blending your life very well because it's not easy. People try to confuse like what kind of labels they have to live with, but it's utmost important that we might be setting some time to each of the activities, and that will help us to grow ahead because each and every part is important. It's not just that the label is attached so that you can just see to it as and when you feel like, but the kind of responsibilities, the kind of actions that we have to take under those domains, it totally requires the kind of attention and the faith that you talked about. So definitely people listening to us are going to relate to this. Now again, talking from the business front, the virtues which are required to build the business today seem to have become quite cliches, what I feel. What often get lost into the cracks of these subtle nuances that actually make or break businesses. So which are such nuances that you tend to focus more on?
Yeah. Well, so what I think is interesting about the fact that the term values has become kind of cliche in business, what I think is interesting about that is that it becomes cliche for people who don't necessarily match the words with their actions. That's when
Yeah.
it starts to feel disingenuous, when it feels like people are saying it just for the sake of making people happy or thinking that's what people want to hear. And that's true with nearly every trend or buzzword you see on social media is if that's not true for the person saying it, it never lands. It will never quite land. And so what I can tell you from what I've learned as an entrepreneur who does place her personal values and our family values ahead of even just like the cutthroat results that you get in business, that's not my top priority. My top priority are the relationships. And so I will always be honest with people about that. I will always lead with love. I will lead with optimism. And these are things that you start to see as soon as you work with me. It is not something I necessarily parade around saying, it's more how I'm operating. And I will say that's a bigger piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
that is harder to do, and that's why it does feel cliche when you only hear the words spoken but you don't see the action matched with it. So if you're feeling like you're stuck in this moment of how do I how do I make myself more authentic in that? I would really sit down. I would journal through what are the things I want to be most known for, and then I would say, how can I find evidence that that's true? If I can't find evidence that that's true, I need to take some purposeful action around that. I need to do
Yeah.
something purposeful to create that truth so that people looking in would know it's true without you having to tell them it's true.
Right. And we just have to figure it out what kind of aspects that we have to focus on, because there is a lot to do, but we won't be in a position to do all of it. So it's more about like focus on your core expertise, and then you can delegate the rest of the things. But then you have to take the action on whatever it is required. And if you're best at it, then it gets a lot easier. But when we move ahead with the business, there are various elements, like everyone is driven by the pursuit of one or more. It could be the money, power, pleasure, and fame. So all of it is required. I won't say that you can just mitigate one and then you can compensate with the other. But how do you see this in your life, and what makes you curious about these elements?
Yeah, I think those are actually when I thought about that, I think it comes more from those are temptations that creep in if you are not clear on why you're doing something. And I think those are easy temptations for an entrepreneur to fall in because a lot of times you're going to hear others talking about those four elements. You're going to hear talk about how many followers you have on Instagram, fame, right? Power, how much of an authority are you on a topic, right? Money, of course, you're going to see lots of that. And then the other, remind me the third
The
one,
pleasure.
pleasure. Well, of course, you're going to see all the things that just look at how easy my life is, right? This whole notion that everyone's just lounging and leisurely living. I don't know one person who really is living that way, who has meaning attached to their life. And so what I think happens is we see those things and from a distance they look alluring, but the second you start taking steps towards them, you really quickly realize they're pretty void of any type of purpose or fulfillment. They don't leave you that ultimately satisfied for very long. So once you've noticed that, then you can do something about that. And I truly believe when you are making big impact, the income follows. It really does, and it's certainly possible. So I am not of the mindset that you need to be barely getting by. I think money and power and fame and pleasure can coexist well in ways that also reflect who you are and your values without them become overbearing. And I think that's where you want to always pay attention. When is this taking on a life of its own and distracting from the real mission?
Yep. And yeah, I seem that I've lost you. uh,
Oh, really?
it's fine at the moment, but
Hello?
hello, hello.
Really? I can see
I'm
you
able to
just
hear
fine.
you,
Okay. Well, I can see you
but
and hear you. I don't know.
okay,
You
now
look
it's fine, I guess. But once you
okay.
were speaking, it seems like I lost you.
Oh,
Okay, I'll take a pause. I'll be able to cut this out.
okay.
Yeah, you rightly mentioned that we just have to focus on the core elements of our life, and we don't have to get intimidated by what others are doing. It's all about our life and how we are going to address the kind of work that we are into. And everyone has to live their part. So we can't just ignore that particular thing. So focus on yourself rather than thinking what others are doing and what kind of life they are living. That makes it quite easier, is what I feel. And when we are talking about the entrepreneurship, I feel that there's this leadership position that again comes into picture. So what's your take on, like, do we need youth or the experience to go further and faster? Because as we progress with the age, the our perspective changes, our thoughts changes. So when we are youth, we have got the energy, we can do multiple things and get things done. And with the experience, it's again a altogether different feeling. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I love this question. So, to go further faster, I think there's two elements, and they both are highlighted by your question. So, youth is speaking to energy. Like we see the energy of youth, and we're like, that's really palpable. It's awesome. It's commanding. And then when you mentioned experience, that alludes to wisdom, right? We have
Yeah.
experience, we have wisdom to pull from. So when you have energy and you have wisdom, it doesn't matter how old you are. You can do so much good with that. So if you're listening and you're 25 and you're like, well, I've got all the energy I need behind my idea, I think, pretty good wisdom for a 25-year-old. The one element that I would recommend is mentorship. You probably need some additional mentorship, not because you couldn't do it and you may be fine, but to go further faster, you could triple your effectiveness when you are working with somebody who has 20 plus years of the exact experience that you are looking to get into. Now you multiply that by your own experience and life experience, and you are so much further ahead. And so what I would say is it is not about youth, it's not about experience. It's more about energy matched with your with wisdom and the willingness to take on mentorship when needed. I think there are certain times where there might be a specific area of our life or business that we need mentorship in. Maybe not all areas. Maybe you struggle with trust and relationships, then that
Yeah.
might be an area you want to hire a coach to help you. Maybe it's around decision making. Maybe it's around a certain skill set. Whatever that looks like, you can get that experience from mentorship. You don't have to wait to become a certain age. And that is really freedom in itself, right? You
Right.
don't have to wait, but you do have to act on it. You have to notice where are my opportunities? Where are those
Yeah.
places that I have gaps?
Right. And it's such a different perspective. I didn't expect this. You have given me a new thought to look after it so that we can try to blend it in how it works, because it's more about the kind of new thoughts that you'll be having, so that it gets easier to apply them and see is it working for you. And these days we just have to get into a place where we are willing to learn from others as well, because
Yeah.
on social media it's constantly getting kind of like I'm better than someone else, so you just
Hmm.
don't have to be into that particular shoes. You just have to see that if you're weak at certain sections, then you can obviously take the mentorship and move ahead. But when we are moving ahead, we always feel that we are constantly striving, and it can be
Hmm.
tiring as well. So does it ever happen with you, and how do you make peace with finding enough? Because whatever we do and however we do, we are not arriving at that particular word that this is enough for me.
Yeah. When I think of the word enough, I think of enough as referring to what we do, not who we are. We
Yeah.
are enough. Like we are worthy of what we want to go for. But enough is more of a, in my world, a barrier of what is enough that I should apply here right now. Maybe that's because I have other priorities. It's because I have a family. I'm considering all elements of what that means to give enough in this moment. And I think that's the tricky part about it, is that the definition is probably going to differ from one person to the next on what enough looks like. And that's not measurable necessarily in all cases. I think the discussion around performance and this culture that we have around us of always striving for more and the pursuit of more is healthy and unhealthy. It's healthy in the sense that we didn't know a 4-minute mile could be run until someone ran the 4-minute mile, right? So it's very eye opening to go, oh, this is possible. what is really challenging about that too is that you don't know somebody else's circumstances.
Yeah.
I really don't like the phrase when people say everyone has the same 24 hours in the day. And I say, absolutely not that. That's not true because nobody's lives are identical. And so, just like for me, I considered starting a podcast years ago. I started it 2 years ago. I thought about it for like 5 years, but at the time, it wasn't the right time. And I could have pushed through, I could have plowed through and just done it. But I knew there was more to it than just doing it. There was a
Yeah.
purpose behind it. And so I would always examine that if you find yourself running into this feeling of not enough, I'm not doing enough, I would examine that and say, where is that coming from? And why do I actually feel that way? And if it's self talk, if it's things we're telling ourselves, then there's probably some inner work of actually writing down what are those thoughts I'm telling myself that are not kind, because you can start to examine them and speak truth directly into them. And I notice, especially with women, but I know it happens with men too, we are putting way more shoulds on our list than anyone else would. We are assuming all these things we should be doing, but nobody else is considering that. Nobody else is thinking we should be doing those things. So it's paying attention to where that intersection is to decide, are we doing enough, so to speak?
Right. Yeah. And we just have to make peace with our priorities. If you feel that this is the right moment, this is the right moment. You don't have to question that. And you just have to see like what you want to achieve in your life. If it is clear, the vision is clear, the goal is clear, I feel that we are in a better position to move ahead rather than just being in a position and having those kind of overthinking moments. So we just have to avoid that. And what's your take on vulnerabilities, Andrea? Because I feel that they can be scary, but if they are like, if we are sharing them, it can also lead to the connection and growth. So, how do you find this concept in the personal evolution thing?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that vulnerability builds connection. What I think you can consider, especially if someone's struggling on social media, like what's too much vulnerability? I don't want to necessarily share everything. There's a difference between being vulnerable and maintaining privacy.
Yeah.
And I maintain a lot of privacy. There's a lot that I don't share on social media, and it's not because there's a secret happen. It's like there's no secrets, but there's elements of everyone's life that don't need to be broadcast. And it doesn't make you less vulnerable because when you do share, you come from a place of genuinely wanting to connect. So if you're sharing something that you know might be a struggle for someone else, or you are currently in a season of sharing about, I recommend sharing a little bit after the season, not in the season. And part of that is because our own perspective has not been fully developed yet. It's okay to share you're having a hard day. That's different. But
That's
if you are really in a season of struggle and there's something actively hurting you in some way or you're processing, I'm a big believer that that should be private and you should work through that behind the scenes before you start sharing about what people should learn from it. You're still learning from it. And I personally think that's where you get a lot of these like internet guru experts and everything mentality that people actually kind of get turned off by because it feels like they're using every hard thing as a moment to gain. And sometimes we really are still in it. We still don't know what we're learning from it. We are still learning. And so if you are going to share something, maybe that's what you share is like, I don't know the answer here. I'm in this, I'm navigating this, and I seriously don't know where this is going to land. I'm still navigating it. That would be vulnerability that actually matches. But I think sometimes this oversharing that happens, it doesn't actually equip the person on the receiving end with more knowledge. In fact, I think it only kind of dilutes privacy. So that's my take on it.
Right. And it's always more about like I follow the same way on the internet. It's more about how do you feel, what kind of moments you have to share. And our life is limited to few people, like into the inner circle. But it's always helpful that if you are helping someone, that's totally fine. If they feel acknowledged with their insecurities, if we are acknowledging them, that's totally fine. But then
Yeah,
remember, there has to be a line. You can't just override it and make it vulnerable for yourself to a larger extent. So
right.
that is something that we have to find. And when we are see there's again this thing which comes to my mind is that in our obsessive quest to reduce the friction that we usually have in our life, we tend to eliminate some of the moments, the experiences, or the textures that made us uniquely human. Now that we have got a lot of AI thing coming into picture, we can easily get this thing done. So how do you embrace friction, and how challenges can be a catalyst for creativity?
I was just having this conversation yesterday with a friend, and we were talking about how right now there is such a rise in our culture, especially with teens and young adults, around avoiding things that are uncomfortable. Just this complete desire to avoid discomfort. And it starts from having access, to a phone that literally can just consume you and you don't have to interact with anybody and you can just like be in another world all the time. That that desire to avoid discomfort, I think, is that friction you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the problem with that isn't so much that it doesn't create opportunity for people to just like take a deep breath and relax. That would be fine. What the real problem is it disconnects us from the real world that we're about and we're around. And you need some of that friction to teach you lessons. There's nothing more uncomfortable than walking into a room with people you don't know and they are not engaging with you. Maybe they're even giving you looks like, why are you here? But if all I did was pick up my phone and escape, I would never experience the hard that comes from it and the lessons that you gain from putting yourself in a tough situation. And so that's just an example of when we dehumanize in some way, whether it's through technology or just avoidance of hard things, we don't learn the lessons. We don't learn the life lessons that lead to that experience and wisdom we were talking about earlier. So avoiding friction isn't going to set you up for long-term success. It might in the moment make you comfortable, but ultimately it's not going to lead you to be a better leader, parent, friend, spouse, any of it.
Yeah, and we are uniquely human. We just have to embrace our personal qualities, the kind of wisdom, the knowledge that we have got. It's more of the process of learning and unlearning. That is how you become better. And once you become better, there is always this notion that the effective leadership can solely be gauged through the external metrics. That is what we have seen. And when we totally fail to measure the other factors as well, the feelings and emotions. So these totally influence the decision making process, is what I believe. So how do you see to it? Because what usually is your style of leadership?
Yeah, my style of leadership is to definitely pay attention to what's happening internally, notice it, decide if those feelings are valid, if they're feelings that I'm experiencing that maybe others are also experiencing. But then also to connect with the people I have the privilege to lead, because it isn't really about me. If you're a leader, it is about them. It is about what they're feeling, how you can best support them, and what they need from you. And maybe they need from you a chance to feel more empowered. Maybe they feel like you are taking the reins and you are trying to do it all, and maybe what they need is a little bit more trust from you as their leader to say I can do this. But no matter what it is, I think you do have to first start by understanding, what are my emotions as a leader?
Yeah.
What am I feeling? And that's intuition. That's really trusting your sense of self and your gut, and maybe you need to write things down, maybe you need to process it first, but then also really connecting with who you lead. I think that's where it's either one or the other. People usually are better at, but when you can combine, that's when you really find that more deep rooted leadership is happening.
Right. And it's also the part of the effective communication, is what I feel. Because if people have got emotion, if they have to express, then you need that communication road to be opened for them, so that they can effectively communicate, let know your feelings, how you're feeling, and what has to be done into that particular area, so that the overall organizational structure becomes quite healthy and happy as well. And when we are into that particular zone of constantly evolving ourselves, we are constantly learning as well. So how do you find wisdom and wholeness in modern world? Because a lot has changed. I'm sure that when you were growing, the situations and the moments were different, the resources were different, and now it is totally different. So what's your take on it?
Well, we still connect most through stories. Humans connect most through stories.
Yeah.
So you can have a modern world with all these modern advancements, but if you're talking to somebody they don't care how much you know. They care about your stories. They care about who you are. They care about your perspective. And so for me, like, I'm trying to take everything that I've ever experienced in my life and put it towards the work I get to do today. And I feel like if I can do that well, I'm uniquely qualified for experiences that only I can be qualified for, because my life experience is different than yours and than the person listening. And so instead of then feeling like you're on this race to get, whatever accomplishment you have next, you are pouring into your present with what you've gained from your past. You've pulled that forward and to equip you in some way. So that really informs what you do next. The modern world is constantly changing. And if you are not currently grounded in who you are and also what you believe, and if you believe in God like I do, like you, that's a component of it too, because you're here on purpose. You know that your life has meaning already, then that's what you're tapping into on a daily basis. So to me, the modern world just plays in the backdrop. It doesn't become the center point of why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that as the generation is progressing, everyone would be able to learn from the previous generation, so that there's a lot to take away from them. The kind of lessons they share, the kind of experience they have got. It's always the practical application of those experiences which makes lives easier. Because right now we are wanting solutions so fast, like it has to be present at that particular moment. But once you look back at the times, if you go into the past, it is very different scenario, and you people have been doing amazing work at it, so there is a lot to learn from it. Andrea, I have been enjoying this conversation. And when we talk about the performance thing, it's always that we have to elevate ourselves. So does it ever happen that you had to overcome the performance paradox while you were designing your life?
Yeah, I mean, performance just in my view refers to there being some sort of achievement at the end, the outcome potential of something. And so yeah, I think because when you're working towards a goal, there's meaning attached to it for you. It's very easy to get fixated on just hyper performance mode. And if you can separate the what you're doing with the who you are, you're going to find so much more fulfillment in pursuing whatever that goal is. There's no need to dilute the goal. The goal can still be super important. In fact, one of my mentors often says, diluted focus gets diluted results. So it's okay to be insanely focused on something, right? It's
Right.
actually healthy. But if you aren't sure of the rest of the puzzle, meaning who you are and what you're about, then performance is just for performance sake. And you're not going to ultimately feel like you're really moving things forward. So you still need to know what's important to you before anything else is going to matter. My podcast is called More of What Matters. And the reason I call it that is because when you're clear on what matters most to you, everything else starts to prioritize around that. And you do have to purposefully do that. But it helps limit this just notion that everything is just about faster, stronger, better, more efficient, better habits. That is an insatiable level of pursuit that is really hard to ever satisfy. So I really want to equip people to know that there is a better way to do that.
Always, we just have to see what's working best for us, and that is how we will get to know that how we can elevate our performance, and never get bogged down by what kind of performance we are having. If it is slow but steady, it still matters, and we are still growing. That is something that we have to remember. And when we are living into this world, I feel that there has been this kind of a phrase that those who survive are the fittest, but I feel that they are most adaptable. So how we can increase our capacity to change with the quest of becoming a better person? Because ultimately whatever we are doing, it is benefiting us, and we are always improving ourselves on a day-to-day basis or at this given moment. Because if you're sharing something, if these are the value nuggets that I have to consume, I'll be having better knowledge. So how do you
Right.
look at it?
Well, I always know someone's going to be successful by the type of questions they ask themselves. And one of those questions is, what can I learn in this situation? What can I learn from this moment, especially moments that are difficult? It's usually not the moments that are great, because in those moments we're celebrating and we're excited about what's coming. But it's the moments of some element of pain or frustration or disappointment. And that's when, if you ask good questions, if you start to ask yourself the real question and you're honest about the answer, that's when you know someone's going to be successful and they can be adaptable. And they have to coincide, because you are not going to get things right the first time to be successful in life, in entrepreneurship, in whatever, parenting, whatever you're doing. So if you're asking the right question and you're willing to get the honest answer and do something about it, success is inevitable. It's your willingness to ask that and actually do something about it.
Yeah, and someone earlier told me that you have to question everything into your life. So that is how you learn. You just have to see like where it is leading you. Because unless and until you won't question yourself, you won't be having a lot of answers and you won't be thinking about what you have to do next. So that is how we just progress step by step, and that is how we start learning from each other. And now coming on to the last part of this episode, Andrea, we are on glitters of life. So, if you have to share one message that will relate to the word glitters of life, what is that thought which comes into your mind when you see this word or like listen to this word? And what would be that one piece of advice to each and every individual?
I love this. It is to tap into your uniqueness so that you can use it for good for others. So, a piece of this whole notion, I mentioned more of what matters, is not out of selfish ambition. It's not so that you can just be your best and live your best life. That's one piece. But the bigger piece is so that it can do something good for others, because we know ultimate fulfillment comes from what we not only do for ourselves but are willing to do for someone else. And so if everything is just through the lens of what can be achieved for me, and it's never genuinely about someone else, and even if people say it's about someone else, you can tell the difference when it's really all about me, advancing and growing and hitting that title and hitting that promotion. If it's all about that, that will ultimately not lead you to a place of fulfillment, no matter how much achievement follows. And so, my advice to someone would be, if you find yourself in a pattern of continually thinking, how can I improve? How can I do better? The next question is, and how can that then help someone else by me becoming more of who I'm meant to be? Because if we're meant to be and we're growing that direction, that is going to be hopefully a finite period where you're like, okay, I'm achieving these things, I'm accomplishing them. But for what purpose is still where people find themselves getting stuck. So if you can attach that next question to it, and how is this going to help others? Who am I going to help impact and serve and love through this achievement, this skill set, this accomplishment? That's when you're going to really be satisfied. And it's the harder part, because sometimes it means a little bit of humility. Oftentimes it doesn't mean just fame, social media
Yeah.
fame, going viral, because that's not really helping somebody. That's more thinking, what can I stand to gain? Your role is to ask how others can stand to gain from working with you and learning about your work, and also getting to know you. So that's the advice I would give. It's a lifelong mission. It's not something you can do overnight. And I love to hear when people are choosing to do it. So it's great.
Absolutely. It's so beautiful. And all I can say is that take your own time, because once you try to do that, you'll be having a lot of answers to it. And then you'll be able to know that how you can lead with purpose. And most of the questions gets answered through that kind of a thing, because we don't have to rush anything. There's plenty of time for each and every individual, and they can just figure it out where they have to go. So that has been a fantastic conversation. Whatever we have talked about, I feel that this conversation is going to be the benchmark for the daily inspiration, where people will be finding a lot of key takeaways. We have talked about like how we can curate our own world, how we can evolve, how we can design our life, and all through the lenses of the personal and the entrepreneur life that you have been living, Andrea. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It has been such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy, and I can't wait to hear what people think after listening to the episode.
Definitely. And if anyone would love to connect with Andrea, I will be attaching her social media links in the episode description. You can totally reach out to her and have that conversation. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, Andrea.
You too, Rohit. I love that we are talking from across the world from each other right now. It is so
Yeah,
awesome.
that is how it works. And it has been fantastic opportunity for me as well. And I loved this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.